The terrorists of the future use logic to kill their enemies. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I wanted to talk about an interesting science fiction short story, one that is about logic and graffiti. I am referring to BLIT by David Langford, which was published in 1988 in the magazine Interzone. For those who don't know, David Langford is a British writer known for writing a lot of science fiction. He wrote about, the future and technology and things like that. He also wrote parodies and pastiches. Like, one of the things he wrote was like, the man writes about the time police in different voices. It was a short story collection where they wrote about time and science fiction in the style of other writers, which is kind of funny. Langford was also deaf, which comes up in some of his writings. He is also deaf. I think he's still alive. That's fascinating. As someone who is passionate about disability advocacy and disability representation, it's good to see that someone like David managed to get work and is seen as influential in a genre. And another thing of note is that he wrote frequently about basilisks in the form of ideas, images that when seen break the logic of the human brain and destroy it. That's one of what the short story I'm talking about today is about. Basilisk being the legendary mythical snake that if you looked at it, it would kill you or turn you to stone or something like that. So that was actually a legend in Europe. So he's probably more familiar with it than Americans were, especially like Americans before Harry Potter, because I know Harry Potter kind of popularized the basilisk, but I don't think those legends were in America really prior to that. If I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments below. But without further ado, let's talk about BLIT, BLIT. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So BLIT, or BLIT, focuses on Robbo. He is a street criminal, maybe a terrorist, just a young person who is determined to cause destruction, who is spray painting graffiti at night. That's how we're introduced to him. But he's wearing unusual goggles because he's not trying to perceive what he's spray painting for a reason we're not initially told. But through reports, government reports, I believe, we learn about the Berryman logical image technique. BLIT, which is the name of this story, which is essentially an algorithm-generated image that, when zoomed in, causes the brain to either be destroyed, killed, or you just can't form logical puzzles. It just renders you less than in some way. This technique was initially found through computer young people using their computers to look at a video game magazine of some sort, and they found that algorithmic image, and it harmed them in some way that we're not really told. I think Langford publishes another story that talks about the Cambridge incident in more detail. But it's highlighted as a basilisk, something that you see that ends up harming you in an unimaginable kind of way. And there's a potential for this to be used as terrorist means, and the government is keeping it under wraps because if people were to find out about this, it could fundamentally change society. Robbo is doing this, and in turn it kills or destroys the human mind after a certain point, and the only way to fix it is to just drink tons of alcohol to wreck your short-term memories so that you forget about that. sort of event, which is not an ideal way to handle emergencies such as this, but this is unforeseen territory here. And we see the police talking about this, how they can't really do anything to Robbo because what kind of crime is he committing? There isn't a name for it yet. And all they can really do is throw him in jail, hold a funeral for their colleagues who died while staring at the image, and then release him the next day. And Robbo is just content in knowing that no damage will ever come to him, at least in the short term. But at one point he is arrested. And as he's lying on his bed, even though he's worn goggles, he realizes that he's seen this image from too many viewpoints, and knows that this basilisk inside his mind is coming, or this parrot, as he says, is coming to wink at him, essentially, to look at him and presumably kill him or destroy his mind. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, this is a fascinating short story. Certainly one that I've never really kind of encountered before, especially with this sort of new crime that's being committed, as well as the how this crime is sort of facilitated. Like one of the things that Langford is talking about here is destructive logic. Langford presents a crime that destroys the human brain, rather than shooting anyone in the head or stabbing them or doing physical harm to them. You're doing mental harm to them by showing them an image that the human mind is not meant to see. Seeing this image triggers a failure in the human mind. It's described as a visual sort of paradox that defies the human perception of logic in a way that we're not consciously aware of, but the brain just can't perceive it. Like it was created by an algorithm. And the result is that if you look at it, like the brain unconsciously just melts because it can't process what it's seeing. And Langford even equates this to the liar's paradox, which they frequently wrote about in other stories. The liar's paradox being statements like, "This statement is false," or "I am lying," which are both they both kind of throw conundrums out there. If you say this statement is false, well, is that true? Like, if this statement is false, but it's like, if it's false, then that would mean it's true. And if it's actually not true, then you can't say this statement is false. Like, it's circular logic that, like, to a computer, it would harm a computer. But in the visual sense, which is what Langford is doing here, a human is seeing something that resembles exactly that, and the brain can't comprehend it. And the result is that the person dies, or their brain is damaged to the point where they're no longer able to contemplate logic. And so I think a big question to ask from this is the brain like a computer in this way? Does it contemplate logic? And if the logic isn't accurate, or if it's circular in a way that like can throw people through a loop, is that going to damage the brain? There are things that trick humans, there are things that confuse human beings, but I don't think our brain is like a computer in that way. It's just a minor disagreement with Langford here, or maybe a major disagreement. This is philosophical in nature. I think the brain does computations, but it doesn't operate in the same way that a computer operates. And I think a lot of other people have suggested that the metaphor of the brain being a computer is a bit too simplistic, because the brain works in vastly different ways, and it doesn't have some of the same functions that a computer does. Things take longer for human beings, and it's more prone to error than I think computers are sometimes. So it's an interesting type of thought experiment, but it relies on a premise that you can break the brain in the same way that you can break a computer. And I don't necessarily think that's true, but again, there might be an algorithm generated image in the future where you could tap into a brain center that might destroy that. It hasn't happened yet, and I guess ongoing research about the brain is always needed to see its weaknesses and how it can be manipulated, but I don't think it can be manipulated in that way. If you disagree with me, let me know in the comments below. Another interesting aspect of this story is the idea of evolving crime. In the story, the police are unprepared to handle the advanced crime that they're seeing, and the government and the police are trying to keep it under wraps, because if word gets out about this, to other terrorist groups, other criminals are going to want to use this. It's going to be an easy way to murder someone without, or like severely harm that person without them fully understanding why that happened. I think the police or someone talks about how you're going to end up with 4 dead prime ministers without really understanding why those prime ministers died and who caused their deaths. It's going to throw the world into chaos in that way, and society hasn't quite caught up to that sort of thing. So essentially using algorithms for evil, which I would argue that the tech industry is kind of already doing that, but in a different way, using algorithm to steal art and money from other people. But here, you're actually using it to sort of break the brain in a more pronounced way, rather than just sort of break the brain in a behavioral sort of way, by showing them an AI generated image or something like that. And it's also interesting because they can't punish Robbo in this story, because what kind of crime has he actually committed? He hasn't physically killed anyone. He hasn't done something that the law defines as a requirement for calling something murder. He's just drawn an image, which itself isn't a crime. There is graffiti laws which they can punish him for, but those aren't major or serious. They can't really charge him with anything, and they couldn't publicly charge him with something, because if they did, other people would find out about this. So Robbo's in a very comfortable place where he knows that no one's ever really going to call him out on this, because this is something that people want to keep quiet. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "I remember when they nicked those international phone fiddlers way back when, and all we could do them for was illegal use of electricity to the value of 60p. They didn't have a phone hacker law those days. We haven't got a brain hacker law now." And that's a fascinating quote, just because it gets at, in the past, there's been instances where technology has advanced, but society or the law hadn't caught up to it. So people were able to commit crimes without being effectively punished for it in a way that eventually the law would catch up. And so, Robbo's doing that exactly now. Society hasn't caught up. And Langford is essentially trying to argue that rapid advances in technology can unleash new horrors in the world. Algorithm-generated images that hack into the brain and destroy it. And society can't keep up. That's happened a lot throughout history. New advances in technology and the law, the system at large, people being unable to keep up with what's going on, and nefarious third parties using it to enrich themselves at the expense of others. Although here, I'm not quite sure Robbo is enriching himself. I think he's just doing it with malice in his heart. But I can see somebody trying to use this as a way to enrich themselves, maybe gain an inheritance from a grandparent or a parent, without anyone speculating that person died of an AI generated image of an attempted murder, if you would classify this as murder. The last thing worth noting is the use of the basilisk in this story, because the basilisk is a legendary creature that if it looks at you, you're dead. So the images are essentially basilisk. That's what Langford has been writing about for quite some time. A number of stories that focus on that specific topic. But what's also interesting is that earlier in the story, Robbo notes that some of the locals in the community that he's defacing play the winking game, where it's an object where you stand in a circle. One person is assigned the murderer role, and they have to look at other people. And if you catch their gaze and wink, that other person dies. And the goal of the game is not to look at the murderer, but to find the murderer. But again, it's hard because if you look the murderer in the eyes, before you're able to accuse them, like, you die as well. It's interesting because that's essentially what the basilisk is. Like, Langford is giving you a clue as to what's happening in the story, because that happens early on before he gets to the rest of it. A little bit of foreshadowing, if you can call a short story like this, if you can say that it has some foreshadowing like that. But that's essentially what's going on here. You can't look the problem in the eye, because if you do, like, it'll enter your mind, and your mind will be destroyed at that point. So you have to find a way to fix the problem without, looking at it, without addressing it directly, without really calling attention to it in that way. Anyway, those are my thoughts on BLIT, or BLIT, or Berryman Logical Image Technique. If you have any thoughts on this, let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of my review. I definitely recommend that you go seek it out. I will put a link to it in the description below. I think it's a pretty interesting short story, interesting science fiction short story that presents an idea that I hadn't really considered before. If you have any thoughts on this, comment below. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, or subscribe so that other people can find out about this short story or this author if they don't already know. Join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about books, movies, TV, that sort of thing. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and basilisk fighting travels. Farewell.